Mason, thanks for taking the time to be here today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for letting me be here.
Yeah, of course, definitely. So, I would love to hear a little bit more about your background as a composer. Before we get into the specifics of Broomsticks, is there anything you'd like to say specifically about your influences or anything that's been a real driving force behind your work?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I always say, with the way that I approach composition, I really enjoy being able to bring genres together in order to create like a shared listening experience for my audiences. I got my undergrad in composition from the University of North Texas, and that's where I was really able to experiment with a lot of different types of sound making, but also composing. And, as a vocalist, classically trained, but also singing in the jazz idiom and popular music and doing vocal arrangements. All of those things really influence the way that I compose. And so, my singing tradition, but then also the stuff I listen to, which is a variety of things, just figuring out how to bring those genres together so you can bring people together to enjoy listening.
When it comes to the specific styles that you're bringing together, I know that in your sort of program note for Broomsticks, you talk about a couple of influences, but more
Mhm.
broadly speaking, would you say there are any handful of genres specifically that you really like to draw from?
Yeah. So in those program notes at the time when I was writing that piece, I was really into Luis Bonfa, who's a Brazilian guitarist. And I just loved the way that he was able to pair some of his melodicism, but the harmonicism and the techniques and the picking and the way that he plays, the way that he accompanies, yet also is like in the forefront with melody. All of those things like really inspired the way I was writing. And I also really enjoy jazz, like acoustic guitar jazz. There's just something that's so airy and fluttering, but exciting and engaging about it. So truly that like Luis Bonfa, Brazilian artists and Brazilian jazz music like really influenced the way I was writing.
Very cool. So this is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, please, your first piece for solo classical guitar, but not your first piece involving guitar, right? So
It
yeah,
is.
I did a little bit of listening to your piece Zeus, and then
Yeah.
also your Dowland impressions. Is that the order in which you wrote them? Zeus being first, and then the Dowland, and then Broomsticks after that.
Oh my gosh, yes, it is. Thank you for
Cool.
listening.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, it's all really, really great. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that approach, kind of like chronologically going through with your sort of getting acquainted for writing for guitar. I suppose I should ask first, do you play guitar as well?
I do play the guitar. I play acoustic. I'm not a whiz at guitar, but I do use it to compose a lot.
When you are composing, just broadly speaking, is it usually the keyboard that you use as a starting place, or do you find yourself using the guitar sometimes, even if that's not ending up as part of the instrumentation?
Yeah, so I use both. Whenever I'm writing I'm a vocalist also. So sometimes it's really nice to just pick up the guitar as something different because the way that you're playing those chords, just the way I'm playing those chords really land in a specific way in my mind when I'm trying to write in a different way than if I were to write on, piano. So I do use both.
So I'd love to hear more your thoughts on kind of the challenges that one would encounter writing for solo guitar versus writing for guitar in more of an ensemble setting. Were there specific things that you had in mind approaching Broomsticks for the first time that you wanted to study or kind of think about a little bit more before starting the project?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So with Zeus, like that piece has like three electric guitars, an electric bass and drum set. And I was going very hard for like the rock kind of idiom with blues and jazz kind of inspirations as well. So with that, since you have two, three, four, five different players, like you can really rely on passing some type of melodic or harmonic material around, or just supporting an overall melody, or just going straight sound, straight like metal type of influences.
Right.
And then for Dowland impressions, that one was voice and guitar. So like there was still some type of balance between two people. So with Broomsticks, I really wanted to make sure that I was writing idiomatic to the instrument. So making sure that there is a variety of musical material, whether having those opening and ending harmonics at the piece or having really fast runs, trying to reference some early music or Baroque type of stylings with some of those 16th notes. So I just really wanted to make sure that there were a lot of different types of musical material within that, so that there's a lot to think about and the guitars can have a lot to play with and interpret when playing.
Definitely, yeah, and that's all there. I think that really comes across. So when it came to working with Hannah, who recorded the piece, right? How much back and forth was there in terms of, chord voicings, fingerings, things like that? Did she have a lot of input, or was it mostly pretty much ready to go by the time that you started working together?
Yeah, first, Hannah is such an amazing guitarist. She was so helpful during the process. And surprisingly, like there wasn't too much back and forth. I was really grateful that, she obviously was able to give some good perspective and feedback. But for the most part, those chords were okay because most of them I could play myself too. And so we were able to collaborate pretty well throughout the process about, if there was one note in like a 5-note chord that like wasn't going to work, she was able to really help with that.
When it came to also preparing to write this piece, outside of the musical influences that we've talked about already, was there any standard classical guitar repertoire that you studied as well?
I devoured Ex-Aequo's Instagram and the Augustine strings, like everyone, just to like when I start composing, I just like to listen first, just to get into the sound world and really understand like what your repertoire is. I cannot put a name to this, but I was researching a lot of early music too, because I was realizing that that was, a pretty traditional standard repertoire. But I was using that for articulation, and I was using that for, just idiomatic language as far as runs. And if you're playing a melodic piece, how can you have a little bit of like accompaniment on the lower strings, of the instrument to figure out how to do those things. So used those as well as for inspiration.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that influence really comes across as well. It's fantastic. When it comes to specific techniques that you wanted to explore, I noticed the harmonics very prominently, kind of at the beginning and then peppered throughout the piece, right? You have those parallel thirds in there as well, right? Were those things that
Mm-hmm.
when you went into writing the piece, you knew like, oh, I have to include that technique. That would be really cool. Or did that happen just kind of organically when you got to that spot? What was the thought process there?
Yeah, great question. It was actually organic. When I was composing this piece, I was also kind of just vocalizing specific ideas. Specifically, I was vocalizing that chromatic descent line. That's more in like the middle of the piece. And so with the thirds, those were things that I was producing with my voice. Just because there are certain notes that I can't like really get my fingers around. But being able to add my voice to it and figure out if that is actually going to work on the guitar was something I used for those specific sections.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, I mean, the sound is great. I love that spot. Was there any specific influence from guitar repertoire that you heard that influenced your decision to include that or anything?
Um, I wouldn't say there's a specific one, but I will say in my own listening and my own like enjoyment of music, I grew up listening to a lot of rock music and a lot of just a lot of different experimental type of music that use electric guitar. And so harmonics was something that I've always loved. It's also in the Downland Impressions piece that I wrote. So I was actually, you were referring to the timeline before. I was finishing up the Downland Impressions while I was starting this. So
Oh, cool.
harmonics were like in my brain for sure. And I wanted to find another way to use them.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Very cool. And not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but any favorite rock bands that you've really been influenced by?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Uh, rest in peace, but Chris Cornell, every single rock band that he's been in, Temple of the Dog,
Absolutely.
Audio Slave, Soundgarden, all of that stuff. I also really loved Billy Corgan and the Smashing Pumpkins.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
loved him. I know this is more like rock and like pop commercial, but I
No,
really
I love it.
loved that. I also love the Gypsy Kings. I think that's another one too. I really
Cool.
like them.
Cool.
So both acoustic, but then also rock.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to what you described as part of your overall style of blending genres too, right? I love that you don't feel the need to kind of push those things away, and writing a piece for classical guitar and kind of letting them influence what you're doing is very cool. Love to hear it. It's great.
Yeah, I think it's fun to do it that way. Specifically in the Dowland Impressions piece, there's actually a quote from Third Eye Blind's album
Nice.
that the guitarist knew. So like being able to like bring those small little idioms or ideas just kind of makes it fresh and fun. Yeah, I like being able
Yeah,
to.
absolutely. It's great. Fresh and fun for sure. I'd also really like to hear your take on the guitar orchestra, or maybe it was a quartet arrangement that was
Mhm.
done in your piece. Am I remembering correctly that that was somebody else's arrangement that was done, or did you
Yes.
collaborate with them on that?
We collaborated on it. It was arranged for guitar quartet, but like it was performed by an guitar orchestra. Such a fun collaboration, really talented students that were able to play that piece.
It's interesting to think that maybe one of the challenges going into this project was trying to figure out how to make all of your harmonic and melodic ideas fit on one guitar. And then to have that sort of turned around and orchestrated for multiple guitars has got to be kind of an interesting thing to observe, right?
Yes, so that was a really great collaboration. I got to collaborate with an arranger. His name's Alejandro, and I also worked with Travis over there, and they were just so great about finding ways to orchestrate the piece because, as you were saying earlier, like there are all these harmonics and really fast passages. So we had to find a way to equally split up those parts for a guitar quartet, especially when you get onto the swing section in the middle. That was a little challenging, but they were so great at being able to orchestrate that so that everyone has some cool harmonics to play, but they don't have to play all of them at once. So
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, the arrangement was great. And I know how challenging it can be to put together a recording remotely with that many ensemble parts, but I thought the finished product was great. You were able to coach some of the students on their parts as well, isn't that right?
yeah,
Cool. And how was that?
that was great. All of the students were so engaged and so intuitive during the process. They were able to they were just so receptive to the process. We were able to go around to different sections virtually on Zoom and talk through each piece. But since everything was, orchestrated for like 4 different guitars, but a whole lot of people, you had to talk through like, what are these 2 notes leading to? Is someone picking up the next 2 notes that you were playing? Are there are ways to be lyrical with your playing, even though you're splitting this up into like 4 different ways. But they were so great, so talented. It was so much fun to work with them.
Yeah, that's really, really great to hear. And like I said, that all comes across in the finished product as well. Both the recordings, the solo and the ensemble one, are really great. So, do you see yourself continuing to use guitar in your ensemble works? Do you see yourself writing more for solo guitar as well?
Yes, this was such an awesome collaboration. And it brought forth a whole lot of inspiration as far as what's possible on the guitar. I love writing for the guitar. I know it can be intimidating sometimes because you're trying to write the chord correctly, as far as the way that it ascends and how you fit your fingers around it. But I really enjoyed this process and I love writing with guitar. So I see myself continuing to do so for sure.
That's great. Hey, we love to hear that for sure. Well, is there anything else about the piece maybe that wasn't included in your program note that you'd like people to know? Any additional context you'd want to offer for that?
Yeah, well, with Broomsticks, it has kind of a kitschy name because, I was writing that in the peak of the pandemic when we were doing the same thing every single day. And so that piece just sparked a lot of joy. It was fun to play, it was fun to write, and it was fun to kind of just hum while I was sweeping my kitchen. That's where the title came from. And with this piece, I just wanted to be able to spark the same kind of joy and just kind of give a new energy to classical guitar repertoire.
Sure. Yeah. And a very important thing, not just during the pandemic, of course, but generally speaking as well. It's really important. Absolutely. So I think everything that you've done here is really, really great. And I just want to make sure to include a plug for the recording of Broomsticks, as well as the entire visual album, Changing the Canon. We're going to have those down in the description of the YouTube video. So please be sure to check that out once we wrap up. But Mason, it's been really, really great chatting with you today. Anything else you want to let people know about upcoming projects? Anything else that we can be on the lookout for?
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. It's so
Of
much fun to
course,
talk about
absolutely.
this. So I do have an orchestral premiere coming up on April 24th. It's with Parlando Chamber Orchestra. It's going to be in New York, and it's inspired by Copeland's Appalachian Spring. And then I also have a collaboration with the Double Reed Society, which is a whole bunch of different woodwinds, which is fun. And then the last performance of my residency with Boston Art Song Society is coming up in May. So lots of new music headed your way.
Well, it's going to be really exciting to hear more of that. That's excellent. So yeah, Mason, thank you again for taking the time today. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you.
Of course, no problem.